So this actually brings us to the last lecture of module 4 and also the last lecture of this course. And if you remember, the last lecture showed us that market tools alone cannot fix our environmental problems. So what would real change look like? This lecture explores three big ideas about transforming the economy itself, like sustainability transition, which means how big systems change. Degrowth, meaning should rich countries stop chasing for growth? Then there is also another interesting new picture of what the economy is for, which is what we call it as a donut economics, and the concept of just transition. So basically what we try to do here is that we explain what a sustainability transition is. How we present the arguments for and against degrowth. I'm sure you may have heard of this whole concept of degrowth. We also explain why fairness matters in this shift away from fossil fuel. It's not just about moving away from fossil fuel. It's important that equity, fairness are also remain central, and also see how all of these work together. So let's begin with what is a sustainability transition. So a sustainability transition is not a small kind of an improvement, okay, likely a slightly better engine or a recycling drive. It is actually a deep long-term change in how society produces energy, food, material, and transport. So it's not short-term. It's a long-term change that we are talking about. So think of the shift from how it happened from horse carts to cars, or from letters to smartphones. Whole system changed, right? Which also includes infrastructure, jobs, habits, culture. So these are called sustainability. These are called transition, actually. Whether it's sustainability or not, we cannot say, but these are known to be transition, because it is not just the horse carts changed to cars. The entire system changed, the entire job market changed, the entire infrastructure around it changed. So if you look at Frank Gill's 2002's work, he gave us a useful map for understanding how such big changes happened. And he called this as multi-level perspective. And it sees change happening at three levels. The first, which we call it as the landscape, top level, the big slow moving background. In, for example, climate change itself, fossil fuel prices, world politics, cultural values. It changes slowly, but it puts pressure on the system below them. For example, climate change is putting a pressure, right, at a system which is already a second system, which is the regime, the middle level, the dominant established system, the rules, institutions, companies, technologies that currently run things. So the fossil fuel energy system is actually the regime. Climate change is at the top level. For climate change to be taken care of, the fossil fuel energy system, the regime needs to change. And regimes are stable and they always resist change because there are too many interests, habits, and investment that support them. And then comes the bottom level, the niche, small protected space where radically new ideas grow, like solar panels, electric vehicles, plant-based proteins. Niche start out weak, but when pressure from landscape cracks open the regime, when there is a space, niche innovations can break through and scale up. So, for example, many were already talking about that, we need to use solar power, we should go for rainwater harvesting. Maybe for 20, 30, 40 years, many of the indigenous innovators are talking about these community-based system, etc., right? But there was no breakthrough. The moment the whole idea of climate change came up, the whole problem of the challenge of climate change came up at the landscape level, you would see that these niche, these bottom level actually found a space to break through. And then it started to become one of the most important things, which started to move from bottom to middle to top level. So, if you picture an old banyan tree, that's the regime. Why? Because it is hard to move with deep roots of habit, money, and politics. The weather around it, is the landscape, because it is slowly changing, and small sapling are the niche, are growing in its shade, waiting for a gap in the canopy to happen so that transitions can happen at the all three levels align. But key insight here is that the fossil fuel system stays dominant, not because it is the best technology, but because the middle regime, the institutions, infrastructure, the vested interests all support each other. That is why policy needs to work at all three different level. If you have global agreement signed at the landscape level, but the regime is not willing to change, it wouldn't work. So it has to happen at all the three levels. Now, this is somewhere we talk about the growth, right? Questioning the growth itself. So, it's actually known to be a very bold idea. It says that rich countries' endless economic growth is incompatible with a livable planet, and that deliberately reducing production and consumption would be necessary and also actually good for people. But what is the core argument around degrowth? That beyond a certain income level, more GDP does not actually make people happier or healthier. Rich countries has actually passed that phase when people are happy, people are healthier, right? Green growth, that is growing the economy while shrinking its environmental footprint, has not happened fast enough anywhere. So decoupling of meaning what we still see is that you need to decouple your GDP from energy and material use, which means that don't connect your growth anymore by extracting more material and by converting more, bringing more energy. Like if you remember, we spoke about low to high entropy, right? So the core argument here is that it's important that global north has already used far more share in the planet. Now it must shrink its footprint to leave room for the global south to meet basic needs, and it can do that through degrowth. Well-being without growth is possible through shorter working hours, universal basic services, valuing care work, and more local economies, right? So rather than going for bigger growth, you can actually now invest your time and energy more on health, education, and transport. Now, the main critic here is that how do we shrink the economy without mass unemployment, debt crisis, collapsing public services, all of which currently depend on growth? Is it politically realistic? Voters expect rising living standards. Few politicians will campaign on less, right? They will not say we will give you more. What does degrowth mean for countries like India or sub-Saharan Africa, where millions still need more energy, food, and infrastructure? So most degrowth thinkers answers it applies to rich countries only. So some scholars prefer the terms post-growth or a growth. Stop obsessing over the GDP either way and focus directly on what matters. So the point here is that degrowth is like telling a person who already eats too much that more food will not make you healthier anymore. So you need to eat, but you need a better diet, not a bigger plate. But the hard question remains, how do you change the menu without breaking the kitchen? Right? So what is important to remember here is that we are not asking people not to eat, you're asking them to change the diet. That is the most important, so that you don't eat also your neighbor's food. This also takes us to another very interesting concept, which we call it as a donut economics. So this is a new picture of the goal. So Kate Raworth actually drew the most famous economic diagram, I think, of the 21st century, which is actually a donut. And it has two rings. The inner rings, which is the social foundation. This is the minimum every human being needs, like food, water, health, income, housing, everything, gender equality, social equality. This is the most important, peace and justice. There are 12 dimensions in all. Failing below this ring means actually deprivation. Okay, so that's very important. Then the outer ring, which is called the ecological ceiling. There are 9 planetary boundaries. If you remember, we discussed this: Earth system limits, climate, biodiversity, freshwater, and so on. And we must not cross this outer ring at all. Going beyond these rings means that environmental degradation we are going to see environmental degradation. But if you remember, we discussed that 4 boundaries are already crossed. Now, the space between these 2 rings is the donut itself, is the safe and just space for humanities. Everyone's needs met within the planet's limit. That's what is the argument, that the goal of the economy is not GDP growth. It should be to ensure that you remain within these ceiling. Right? Robert also lists 7 ways to think like 21st century economy. Change the goal from GDP to donut. see the economy as embedded in society and nature, treat people as social and caring, not just selfish. Think in systems and feedbacks, design economies to distribute wealth from start, not that we will first become rich and then we will start distributing, and create businesses that regenerate nature rather than degrade it. So basically, in simple word, imagine humanity living in a donut, fall into the hole in the middle, and people lack basics. Okay, if you are in that, if you fall inside that hole, then you are basically, you do not even have basic facilities. Step off the outer ridge, you damage the planet. So good economics will keep everyone on the donut. That's the whole idea of donut economics. Again, not possible to deal a lot on this, but it's again a very interesting way of understanding how economy should function, like the way we discussed planetary bounding. So donut economics is also a very, very interesting argument that we should be careful. We should not fall within that hole, because that is not good either. That is deprivation. But if you move outside the edge, that is also bad, because you're basically damaging the environment, the ecosystem, the planet. So if you are a good economist, you need to make sure that your economy is on the donut. Now it brings us to another very interesting concept, which is something is coming up a lot now, particularly related to climate change, which we call it as just transition. Who pays the price of change? Even a necessary transition creates a loser. If a coal mine closes, of course, climate wins, but miner, her family, the whole town lose their livelihood. A just transition here means sharing the benefits and the burden of this change fairly, with special care for workers and regions that depends on fossil fuel. Now, this is very important, because many a time for climate mitigation, we are definitely moving to cleaner technology. But what is going to happen to those who were earlier involved in those older ways of producing energy? Shall we forget about it? Why are they, only sharing the burden, but somebody else is enjoying the benefit? So where the idea came from, the idea actually came from US trade unions in 1990s, who saw that environmental protection could cost jobs in mining, steel, and chemicals. It frames climate action as a workers' rights issue too. Basically, if you are talking about climate action, then it has also become, workers' rights. It's become workers' issue. What it requires: income support, retaining of for displaced worker, helping fossil fuel regions build new industries. That's why we say just transition. It is a transition, giving workers and communities a real voice in planning and public investment, in new jobs, infrastructure. So globally, 10 to 15 million fossil fuel workers have already faced displacement. This is a big challenge now. Coal regions in India, in Poland, in South Africa, in US are especially vulnerable, with very few alternative jobs available, given that the coal miners have a specific talent which they cannot really use in solar power or wind power. So how do you actually make this transition more just, so that it happens slowly and you are able to provide them with alternative sources of livelihood? But the hard question here is that who decides what is just? Whether that just will be decided by workers or governments or corporations who are building these, bringing these transitions. So top-down frameworks do not really always match with what affected communities themselves consider fair. So there is a mismatch of what maybe a government or a corporation would say as just, and what workers or communities or whose livelihoods are gone would call it as just. So just transition means that coal miners should not be the one who pays for climate policy designed by everyone else. If the change is not fair, it will not also be fast, because people will continuously resist this transition because they would see that it's going to ruin their livelihood. Now, how this three framework fits together is the important things to understand. Why are we talking about these three things? The first is degrowth sets the scale. How much economy can safely take the planet? Rich countries must shrink their material footprint, because if you continuously grow, you will go out of the scale. And when you go out of the scale, others would also lose. Second is the donut sets the target, meets everyone's basic needs without crossing the planetary boundary. So the first is scale, second is what is your target. And just transition sets the condition. The change must be fair or it will not happen at all. right? So therefore, the three framework claims that degrowth claims growth itself is the problem in rich countries. So policy focus should be shorter work time, universal basic services, caps on resource use, and who leads it? Social movements, progressive states must lead this. Donut economics core claim is that meet all human needs within planetary boundaries. Do not cross the boundary. So you need to redefine prosperity, distribute and regenerate by design. Who can do this? Who can lead businesses, governments, cities? Just transition talks about ecological change must not create new injustice. So you are on one hand saying we are going to take care of climate change by mitigating, but it should not create injustice somewhere else. Workers who policy focus should be worker support, retaining, democratic planning, and who needs to lead? Trade unions, communities, as well as states. And these are just, I mean, as today, when I'm talking to you, you might see that these are just academic ideas, but no. Amsterdam and Barcelona actually has adopted donut thinking in the city strategies. Scotland has a national just transition commission. So it's not that these are all in books and paper. These are also being applied practically, and it is actually possible to do if you want to do it, implement it seriously. So what are the key takeaways? Real sustainability requires structural change. Like I mentioned, that it doesn't happen overnight in institutions, infrastructure, culture, not just better technology. Degrowth argues that in high-income countries, growth itself is the problem, not just the type of growth, the growth itself. Even if you are going green, it doesn't matter. You should actually, your whole, like you're eating too much, you need to have a diet control. Donut economics reframes the goal of the economy, meaning a safe and just space for humanities between basic needs and planetary limits. So you cannot say that, oh, I'm crossing the planetary limits because basic needs are yet not fulfilled. That's not the solution. Just transition insists the cost of change must not fall on workers and vulnerable communities. So together, degrowth sets the scale, donut sets the target, and just transition sets the conditions. Now, if you're interested in these topics, again, there are a number of readings for you. You can actually read those readings, and you can actually ask the question, can India really pursue a just transition away from coal while meeting its development goals, and what would it require, and who should pay for it? That's the kind of research question. Or even degrowth, does it make sense for countries like India? So these are some of the points that I wanted to bring up for this course. Towards the end, I tried to bring in as many new theories and new ideas that are coming up in this field. I know some of these are we have just touched upon, and I haven't really gone deep into it. But the idea was not really to go deep into it, but the idea was to open it up for you to think about them, to see how you can further work on them. How can you, design your PhDs or your postdoctoral work around these new subjects, new topic, which are actually still very new in our university systems. We are still not studying them in detail. So that was the purpose of bringing these new concepts and new ideas. So I'm going to end here, and I hope you enjoyed the class, and would look forward to your feedback. And thank you very much for joining me in this very interesting course on ecological economics. Thank you.